Let's do something we rarely do on this programme, Minister, and at 7:05 in the morning, talk about football for a change. We're hearing from the Prime Minister that in addition to the semi-finals and the finals of the Euro this summer, he might be happy to host the entire thing. Look, as a statement of where we might be by the summer in terms of a return to normality, this is a pretty big one.
Well, I'm not sure what the actual details of this competition might be, but clearly the Prime Minister set out last week a strong roadmap. Many people I've spoken to have been very relieved at the fact that there is a timeline. I think it set clear dates by which we want to reopen things, and obviously we want to get things started, the economy up and running as quickly as possible.
But as the business secretary, I'm sure two things. One, you'd probably be happy for football to come home any day of the week. But if there's a possibility of England hosting the World Cup in 2030, that's something you're going to be full square behind.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember the European Cup, 96, I think it was. And that was a great occasion. We'd be very, very happy to see a significant football tournament coming back to Britain.
But can we just specifically, though, about this summer? You know, we're hearing rumours that perhaps Wembley could be properly rolled out, that given where we are with testing, given where we are with vaccination, we could have 90,000 people in Wembley, you know, perhaps one or two of us could also be there cheering on whoever's lucky enough to get to the final. I mean, are we anticipating people being able to travel here for Euros this summer?
It's March the 2nd now. I don't want to run ahead of ourselves. I think there's still a serious issue that we have with coronavirus. There are still people who are very ill. The vaccine rollout has been very successful. We're very happy about that. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves and speculate about Wembley in 2 or 3 months' time.
OK, but just in terms, though, of perhaps, you know, the biggest news to emerge from the Downing Street news conference yesterday, the evidence that, frankly, all of us were waiting to hear, that reduction in mortality and hospitalisations amongst those that have been most vaccinated so far. You know, given the fact that there is no indication that as we move through the groups, vaccine efficacy will in any way drop. We're expecting it, in fact, to get better the younger people get. This is the beginning of the end, isn't it? Finally, we can actually say this is the light at the end of the tunnel.
I agree. I think the information is very encouraging, and the vaccine rollout has been very successful. I don't want to over-egg the pudding, though. I don't want to say that we're completely free of coronavirus. I think there are still dangers ahead. But you're right, the numbers are encouraging. But I don't think it would be right for me to speculate about football tournaments in 3 months' time.
Indeed. Just in terms, though, of where we are in combating COVID-19 in the United Kingdom, can you provide us any update as to whether or not we have sourced that sixth case of the Brazilian variant? And indeed, you know, have we had any indication from surge testing in South Gloucestershire just yet about any community transmission?
I think we're still monitoring the situation very closely. And you're quite right. I think there was one case of the Brazilian variant. As far as I know, there are 6 cases, but there's one where the person involved didn't fill in the forms correctly. And we're still trying to work out exactly what has happened to that potential carrier. But we're dealing with this situation. And I'd like to remind you also that we had the South African variant, and we've been dealing with that too. But the vaccine rollout has been extremely successful. And as you said earlier, it does give us a lot of cause for some hope.
Just in terms, though, of what we're going to be hearing this week, of course, tomorrow, budget day, and as is common on this programme, I'm sure you will not be drawn into commenting on specific measures which will be announced then. I do think, though, from a kind of philosophical and ideological standpoint, I mean, William Hague has said, look, you know, we have to be clear with the public, we have to level with the public. Some business, some personal taxes will have to rise. Now, away from the budget, it certainly seems like at some point over the remainder of this Parliament that tax rises in some form have to be a part of the economic response to COVID-19.
I think the main thing, certainly on my desk, and certainly the Chancellor's as well, is to support business through this very difficult time. And you will know that the support that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor in particular have given to the economy is unprecedented. We've given something like, put in something like £285 billion since the coronavirus pandemic crisis began. And I think in tomorrow's budget, the Chancellor will be very minded to support struggling businesses, struggling people as well, and so that we can get through this very difficult pandemic.
As you say, there have been huge amounts of money spent since the beginning of this pandemic in terms of business support, in terms of support for individuals, and so on. However, yesterday we learned that the government, the government, in terms of its foreign aid budget, is not just halving, is cutting by 54% the amount of money we give to Yemen. Why are we choosing this moment to do so?
I don't think that, I haven't seen the numbers, but the actual amount that we're reducing is something like 0.7 of GDP to 0.5%. And I think it was felt that given the incredible stress that we've gone through in Britain, giving 0.7% of the economy in this particular year was challenging. I think the amount has been reduced by little. And after all, the European average is 0.45, so we're still giving more of our national wealth than
I understand that, but
the EU country. Sorry, I'm trying to answer your question, but I think that I think that this is a temporary measure. I think the Chancellor has said that we want to fulfil our commitments, and we are doing so.
Yeah, it's a temporary measure at a time when tens of millions of people in Yemen are at threat of death from famine. We gave £214 million to Yemen last year. Indeed, beginning of December, we announced an additional £11 million. The Foreign Secretary telling the UN Security Council, new UK aid will save lives by making sure the poorest Yemenis can feed their families. The UK cannot solve this crisis alone. Other donors must now release their funding and contribute more support to prevent this becoming an even bigger tragedy. That's the Foreign Secretary to the Security Council calling on the world to give more money. And then we announced that we're going to cut it in half.
I think he would do that anyway. And I think when you look at Yemen, and I've travelled in the Gulf a lot, there's a lot more that countries in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and other countries can do to support humanitarian crises in that region.
Perhaps secure those assurances before we cut our own aid budget. I mean, we're talking about lives here. And the only thing I'm going to suggest is, the UN Secretary General and others are warning of a pending crisis in Yemen, and we've just counted the amount of money that we're giving them by half.
I think Britain has always been at the forefront of international aid responses. I think the people in this country are extremely generous. The government has provided all sorts of financial support and also diplomatic support to crises in the region, and will continue to do so.
As is so often the case, Minister, when we speak at this time in the morning, there is a union flag over your shoulder, as there has been with many colleagues. Clearly, the union has been more in the spotlight in recent times than perhaps it has been for a long time in terms of the Conservative Party, at least since the last independence referendum. I just wonder if you agree with the Prime Minister when he says that another Scottish referendum is irrelevant, uncalled for and unnecessary.
I've always thought that the issue of Scottish independence is something for the people in Scotland. I do remember in 2014, I think it was, that they said that the referendum would settle the issue for 25 years, for a generation. And I am surprised at how often it's come back, but it's up to the Scottish people to decide when and whether they want a referendum.
Do the struggles between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon perhaps make it rather easier for the government to resist calls for a second independence referendum, particularly if, as everyone expects, the SNP do rather well come the Scottish parliamentary elections in May?
Well, I don't know how well any of these parties are going to do. Clearly, there's been a lot of noise about what's going on in the SNP. I think that's a matter for them, their internal process, their discipline. I'm not going to be drawn in on the internal politics of the SNP. Let's just see what happens in the Holyrood election in May.